My name is Mark, a recording angel. I've been observing this earth since the dawn of creation. The Most High has asked me to share my recordings with you. The following are my records of the church's early years and earliest believers, not just adults, but children too, collected in this book, Champions of the King, the Story of the Apostles. If today's recording contains situations which might be uncomfortable for younger listeners, I will mark the video with the words parental guidance recommended.
Elihu ben Malchus. Wake up, Elihu, you can't sleep all day. Elihu felt his aunt's foot gently prodding his ribs. He rolled over and yawned. Come on, she said, the sun is almost up. If you wait too long, everything at the fish market will be picked over, and we'll end up eating the leftovers. The boy groaned. Life in Capernaum was nothing like the one he was used to. Ever since the night in the garden, when Yeshua of Nazareth had been arrested, Elihu's father had been sick. One of Yeshua's followers had cut his father's ear off with a sword, and Yeshua had picked it up, looked gently into the eyes of the chief servant of his greatest enemy, and replaced his ear. It had healed perfectly. The ear had nothing to do with Malchus's illness. His problem was going back to work for the high priest who had engineered the execution of the Nazarene. Sometimes the body has a way of providing an escape through illness when the mind can't figure a way out. With another yawn, Elihu stood up.
It's barely daytime. What is it you need me to do?
I think some fresh fish would be nourishing for your father. Up there in the city, you probably live on that nasty dried fish from the market, or the salted kind of fish that's been sitting around half the day waiting to get there. We're going to feed your father some real food and get him well again.
You're right about the fish, Elihu said with a smile. Many things we get in Jerusalem are very good, but the fish isn't so great.
Well, fish is what your father needs right now, his aunt insisted. I want you to go down to the market. The fishermen have been out all night and usually arrive back about this time. You can get the best stuff if you are there when they first return. Sleepily, Elihu nodded. You know how to select good fish, don't you? The boy laughed.
Yes, he said. Just because I live in the city doesn't mean that my education has been totally lacking.
She chuckled and ruffled his hair that was already tangled and tousled and standing straight up from his night's sleep. Fine, get yourself down to the shore and see what they caught last night. Elihu would do almost anything to see his father doing better, although he didn't think that food was the real problem. Turning, he walked toward the lake shore. He enjoyed watching the fishermen sort the fish. They flung the good fish into the big stone holding tanks built for that purpose by their docks, and the unclean fish and other water creatures got thrown into baskets to be sold to the Gentiles or fed to animals. As he selected a large, beautiful fish from the stone tank, he double-checked as always to make sure it had both fins and scales, for no self-respecting Jew would ever consider eating a fish that did not have both. After all, that was the law. When he reached into his money pouch for a coin to pay the fisherman, he suddenly let out an involuntary shriek and dropped both the fish and the pouch with a splash into one of the tanks. It startled the fisherman, too. All the color had drained from Elihu's face as he pointed a finger.
You're that man, he said.
I don't know what you're talking about,
the person stammered.
That night in the garden, you're the one with the sword, my father's ear.
Although obviously rattled, the fisherman took a deep breath, seemed to calm himself, and drew himself up to his full height.
Yes, my name is Peter, and I was there that night. Is your father well?
No,
Elihu said sadly.
But his ear is fine.
The fisherman smiled.
Well, the master fixed that part of him. That will probably be good forever. What's his other trouble?
His stomach, the boy said. He's been unable to eat or keep any food down ever since then, and he hasn't been able to work.
The big man nodded.
I'm sure it's hard for him to serve the high priest after the master healed his ear.
I think that's part of the problem, Elihu said after considering a moment.
The big fisherman dug his toe into the dirt as though he was thinking about something difficult. The silence stretched on until it was almost uncomfortable.
Do you think your father would allow me to speak to him?
The fisherman asked finally.
I don't know. Would you be willing to do that?
You see,
Peter said slowly,
I was very afraid that night. I don't usually go around cutting people's ears off.
They both laughed awkwardly.
I did worse things that night. I also denied I ever knew the master.
It was a horrible night, and it was all a terribly frightening weekend,
Elihu said.
Well, Peter continued, that's what I was getting to. You see, I've seen him since then. He met me here on the beach. He even fixed breakfast for my friends and me. But he forgave me for all that I did. I was able to get over my paralyzing depression and fish again.
So you know what my father's feeling?
Maybe not exactly the same, but yes, some of it.
Elihu smiled.
Well, if you'll help me find my money pouch in this wriggling mess of fish, I'll go home and ask him.
Soon both of them were in the tank up to their armpits and feeling around for the missing pouch. A week later, Elihu was happy to be back in Jerusalem. He didn't know what Peter had said to his father during their secret meeting, but Malchus had been in a better mood ever since and was eager to get back to work, which was good because the Feast of Weeks was quickly approaching. It was the great harvest festival where Jews came from all over the country, and the high priest's office was extremely busy. Annas was delighted to have Malchus back. "No one else is able to run everything as smoothly," the religious leader told him as he welcomed his servant back. Malchus thanked him, but said very little. I was happy to be back in Jerusalem too. The risen Son of the Mighty One was making appearances in Jerusalem, and I hated being away from where the action was. Just being where he might show up was exciting. Peter had returned to Jerusalem too, to meet with the others and discuss what to do next. I had a great sense of anticipation, and it appeared to be catching. Elihu was on his way home from the temple after delivering something for his father. Suddenly, he did a double take. Could it be? Surely not. The last time he'd seen Peter was in Capernaum, yet it looked like him. Elihu quickened his steps to catch up. The man ahead of him was in a hurry, moving with long strides. He had pulled his cloak up over his head, so it was difficult to see his face. Yet Elihu was almost sure. The man turned several corners and dodged into a shop, but the boy stayed right behind him. Finally, Peter spun around.
"Why are you following me?"
he demanded.
"It is you,"
Elihu said.
"Oh,"
Peter replied, recognizing the boy.
"It is me. Why are you following me?"
"I was just happy to see you. My father has done so much better since you spoke with him."
"It wasn't me,"
the man said softly.
"It was the Lord's doing. I'm not all that special."
Elihu grinned.
"Well, I'm happy to see you anyway."
The fisherman smiled and quickly glanced around.
"You mustn't follow me, nor should you be seen with me. It's dangerous. I don't want to get caught, and I don't want to get you in trouble. So please don't follow me."
I was wondering something,"
Elihu said, screwing up his courage.
"You said that Yeshua met you and fixed you breakfast that day. Is he around?"
Peter again looked over his shoulder.
We've seen him. He joins us occasionally."
"Here in Jerusalem?"
Peter nodded.
"That's why I'm here."
"I want to see him,"
the boy declared. Peter's glance softened.
"We're meeting later today, out on Olivet."
Elihu nodded. He knew where the place was on the Mount of Olives.
"You may come, but don't bring anyone with you, and don't tell anyone where you're going."
"I won't. Will he be there?"
"I don't know,"
Peter said slowly.
"Well, I will be,"
Elihu promised.
"Fine."
Peter glanced around once more.
"Now stop following me and go do something useful."
"Yes, sir,"
Elihu said with a grin and turned to walk the other way. After stopping at home for lunch, Elihu then headed for the Mount of Olives. It wasn't that far. It was just that it seemed all uphill. Jerusalem itself perched on top of several ridges and deep valleys, and more hills surrounded the city. The sun beat down on him as he kept trudging.
"It's only a Sabbath day's journey,"
he mumbled to himself. "It's not that far." The cool shade of the olive trees and the fragrance of the garden were welcome after crossing the valley. The boy looked around. It wasn't long before he came upon a small group not far from where Yeshua of Nazareth had been arrested that horrible night. Although they looked at him suspiciously, he quietly joined them. Suddenly his heart did a flip-flop. Yeshua stood right in front of them. Elihu stared at the scars on his hands and wrists from the iron spikes that had fastened him to the cross. It was really him. As Yeshua made his way around the group, speaking to everyone, Elihu became terrified as he got closer and closer. Would he recognize him as the son of the servant of the man who had engineered his arrest and unfair trial? Yeshua looked into Elihu's eyes and put his hand on his shoulder. Suddenly, Elihu knew everything was going to be fine, and that he was going to worship this man, or this God, or whoever Yeshua of Nazareth was, as long as he lived. Yeshua sat and spoke with them for a long time. "I'm going to leave you," he said finally. "I want you to stay in Jerusalem until my spirit comes and joins you. I may not be with you in my body, but I will be with you through the Spirit, and he will lead you and comfort you. But you must stay together here in Jerusalem until that happens." Everyone in the crowd nodded or murmured their consent. Then all of a sudden, in the middle of his speaking, and before anyone realized what was happening, Yeshua started to rise. Elihu caught his breath sharply. No, his eyes weren't deceiving him. Yeshua was getting higher and higher now. Everyone watched in silence and shock as he ascended higher and higher until the glare of the sun blurred their vision and the clouds swallowed him up. "He's gone!" someone exclaimed. Everyone gazed at the sky and then each other, trying to figure out what had just happened. Certainly Yeshua was gone, but where? Suddenly they noticed that two strangers had joined them. They were dressed all in white, without a single proper Jewish blue thread decorating the edge of their garments.
"Why are you staring so?"
one of the men asked.
"This same Yeshua is going to be back. He'll return exactly the same way as you saw him go."
Elihu released his breath. He felt as if he'd been holding it for hours.
"So he's coming back,"
he whispered to himself.
"Oh, thank you, God."
Suddenly the men were gone too.
"Where did they go?" someone asked. "They were just here. Maybe they were angels."
The crowd started murmuring.
"I guess none of us really understand what just happened,"
Peter said.
"except that Yeshua has left us. But he did tell us we need to stay in Jerusalem until he returns. Perhaps we can rent that room that we all met in the night before his arrest. That should have enough space for most of us. But for now, let's head back into the city and just try to keep everything a secret."
With nods and comments of,
"Yeah, that's a good idea,"
the little knot of people headed back toward the city in twos and threes. Elihu just sat under a big olive tree. His mind raced so fast that he could hardly keep up with his thoughts. What would happen now? What would they do once they went back to the city? How could they tell when Yeshua's spirit came? Would his believers let him join the group? Suddenly he stood to his feet.
"No matter what the others think or decide, I'm a believer. I'm a follower of Yeshua, and I will do what it takes to be there when his spirit comes in whatever way that is."
He drew himself up to his full height and strode purposefully back down the hill toward the city. Though Elihu kept his eyes open for any signs of Yeshua's followers, he saw no one. It had been 10 days now, and he was afraid that they had gotten their message and the spirit of Yeshua had come, and then they had left without him.
"Why?" he wondered. "I prayed to the Almighty One, the Father, and I prayed to Yeshua, his Son. I believe he is God's Son. I asked to be included among his followers, but I haven't heard anything. Perhaps Yeshua just wants me to be a follower later."
He shrugged. It was so hard to know what to do next. Meanwhile, he would just do what his father told him, unless God or Yeshua showed him otherwise. It was the Festival of Weeks, the first of the wheat harvest, Elihu's favorite festival of the year. Everyone gathered from all over Israel at the temple. No one would work on that day. Just celebrate and relax. Visitors packed the city. The colonnades and courtyards of the temple buzzed like a veritable beehive. And his father, who
who was now looking much healthier, raced around like a chicken with its head cut off, trying to keep up with all of the high priestly duties and events that he coordinated for the high priest. Excitement definitely hung in the air, and though it was just 10 o'clock in the morning, the excitement of some people in the crowd seemed to have pushed them a little over the edge. Several jumped up onto the steps and started preaching and shouting. Elihu shook his head.
There's a few in every crowd,
he chuckled to himself. Suddenly he stopped. Could it be? It was the burly fisherman he had met in Capernaum. When Elihu edged closer, he saw that it looked like Peter, but it certainly didn't sound like him. Preaching loudly and boldly, he no longer seemed afraid, and he was talking about Yeshua. The youth stopped to listen.
Hey, Elihu, I haven't seen you in a while.
His friend Stephen nudged him.
Where have you been?
Elihu asked, turning to him.
Around. Well, Elihu said, we spent a couple weeks with my aunt while my father was so sick, but we're back now.
Stephen pointed to Peter.
He's saying some pretty amazing things.
Yes, were you here that week when Yeshua was crucified?
Stephen nodded.
It was terrible.
After carefully glancing around, Elihu whispered,
He's been back, you know.
Suddenly Stephen also looked around.
I know,
he said, his words barely audible.
I saw him. Really? Me too.
I know. I noticed you up on the hill on Olivet the day he left.
You were there?
Yes, you seemed to be lost in your thoughts at the time.
Elihu sighed.
I was. I had a lot on my mind, but now I'm a believer in him.
Stephen broke into a huge smile.
Me too.
Their attention turned to Peter and the other preachers.
I never thought of him as much of a speaker,
Elihu commented, indicating Peter.
Stephen laughed. Me neither. It's the Spirit.
The Spirit?
Aha! There were 120 of us all packed into that little room, waiting and praying. It had been 10 days, and none of us went anywhere because we knew that he would send his Spirit. He had said he would. And suddenly we heard a sound like rushing wind, and then it was like fire. It just swept through the room and filled all of us who were there. And it just makes such a difference. The biggest one, I think, is that it took away all of our fear.
Well, it certainly took his away,
Elihu said, gesturing toward Peter.
Well, think about it. Most of Yeshua's followers are uneducated. Definitely not the ones you would expect to be up here preaching. Yet listen to them. It's Yeshua's Spirit. He's with us.
Stephen's voice had a note of awe in it. Elihu broke into a smile.
As long as he's with us in body or in spirit, things will be fine.
Yes, and they will, no matter how they may look at times. But you know what really amazes me?
What?
Elihu asked.
How did a fisherman like Peter learn to speak fluent Greek?
Greek? I've never heard him speak Greek. A fisherman like him would know only Aramaic.
Well, Stephen said, he's speaking in Greek now. That's what I grew up speaking as a little boy. I know Greek when I hear it.
Elihu listened carefully, but Peter was definitely using Aramaic, the language that most local people spoke. Then he shook his head.
I don't hear anyone speaking Greek.
They glanced around. The variety of clothing styles indicated that many pilgrims and visitors from other countries had come to the temple for the religious festival. Curious, Elihu began to eavesdrop on what they were saying to each other.
How did he learn to speak my language?
A man with what Elihu thought was an Egyptian accent said to the person next to him.
He's not speaking your language, replied his companion. He's speaking Gaelic from the northern tribes.
No, I am from Persia. I recognize my home language when I hear it, insisted a third.
When Elihu looked at Stephen, his friend whispered,
It's a miracle.
My father used to tell me a story when I was little about a tower called Babel where God confused all the languages and no one could understand each other anymore.
Elihu replied after a pause.
Perhaps this is God doing just the opposite, so that no matter what language it is that Peter's speaking, everyone hears it in their own tongue.
Praise God! Stephen exclaimed, then glanced around in concern to see if anyone had heard him. He lowered his voice. The miracles just never end. Not only has he provided the speakers with enough courage to preach, but he's made it possible for everyone here to understand it, no matter where they're from.
This is the best Feast of Weeks ever,
Elihu thought, grinning to himself.
This broadcast has come from the book Champions of the King by Sally Pierson Dillon, with permission from the Review and Herald Publishing Association. This book and the rest of the series, War of the Ages, can be purchased by going to www.adventistbookcenter.com or by calling 1-800-765-6955. I'm your narrator, Austin Backus, and this audio project is a gift to you from my free Christian book ministry, RXF 1888. Please visit our website, www.rxf1888.com, to request free Christian books for both kids and adults. And join us here again for more stories from Mark the Recording Angel.